Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're going way back in time to ancient China
Hmm.
to explore the wisdom of Sun Tzu and the art of war.
I love it.
It's a classic, right? And probably you've heard the quote, know your enemy and know yourself, but we're going to go deeper than that.
Yeah, we're going to unpack what he really
Did
meant
that, but
and a lot more.
for this deep dive, we're using a YouTube documentary called Sun Tzu, the Art of War documentary. It's from the channel The People Profiles.
Great channel.
It's really good. And it sets the scene so well, and it's packed with interesting historical stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Our mission, though, is to go deeper than the basics
Mm-hmm.
and extract the aha moments.
I love that.
That can help you think more strategically in any situation,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's business or relationships or anything.
Yeah, I think what's so cool is how a text from centuries ago can still be so relevant today for leaders and strategists
Totally.
and even everyday people.
Yeah.
And we're going to dive into the historical context, unravel the mystery of Sun Tzu himself, and explore those key principles that have made this book a timeless classic.
Absolutely. So let's start with the man himself who was Sun Tzu. The documentary goes into the debate,
Yeah.
Was he even real or was he just a legendary figure?
Right. He's a bit of an enigma, and the earliest mentions of him appear centuries after he supposedly lived,
Right.
which is super intriguing. Historians have debated this for ages, pointing to conflicting accounts in those old texts.
Yeah, it really is like trying to piece together a puzzle, but with a lot of the pieces missing.
Mm-hmm.
If we aren't even sure if he was real, why has his book had such a big impact?
Yeah, that's the question that keeps scholars coming back to Sun Tzu.
Hmm.
One theory is that he might be like this composite figure,
Okay.
Almost like a mythical embodiment of military genius.
Okay, yeah.
Like drawing on the experience of several real strategists. And there's even a possibility that Sun Bin, who we'll talk about more later,
Yeah.
could be the true author or at least contributed heavily to the text.
Okay, so Sunben, we'll get to him. But for now, let's stick with what we know, or what we think we know, about the world Sun Tzu supposedly lived in. The documentary does a great job of setting the scene of ancient China during the Warring States period.
It was such a chaotic time, constant conflict and political upheaval,
Yeah.
rival states battling for power, a brutal and unpredictable environment.
So not for the faint of heart.
No, not at all. You need to be sharp to survive.
Definitely sounds like his ideas were forged in a really intense environment of competition and survival.
Absolutely.
So how did he navigate this dangerous world? What does the documentary tell us about that?
Well, both the Shiji and the Wuyu Chunki, which are two key historical texts,
Okay.
suggest that Sun Tzu served under King Hilu of Wu.
Okay.
And this king, he rose to power through some pretty ruthless means.
Wow.
It was a world of political maneuvering, assassination, all part of the game.
Wow, that is intense. It sounds more like Game of Thrones than anything else.
Right.
It really sets the stage for understanding the kind of strategic thinking that you'd need,
Mm-hmm.
and not only to survive, but to thrive
Absolutely.
in that kind of cutthroat environment.
Yeah.
So how does Sun Tzu even come to the attention of this ambitious king?
Well, King Helu needed someone brilliant to lead his armies against his enemies. He needed a strategist that could win battles,
Yeah.
outmaneuver opponents, secure lasting victories.
So he needed a game changer. Did Sun Tzu just walk in and say, hey, I'm the guy?
Not quite. According to the Wuyu Chunki, Sun Tzu was living a secluded life.
Okay.
Talents hidden. It took some convincing.
Really?
Yeah, from the king's emissaries to get him to come out of retirement and show off what he could do.
It's like a classic hidden talent story.
I know, right?
But how did he prove his worth to the king? Didn't it involve those palace women?
This is one of the most famous stories about Sun Tzu King He. He Lu was eager to see if Sun Tzu could deliver on his promises right.
Of course.
So he gave him command of his palace women, basically his concubines, as a test.
I'm trying to imagine this. What a scene.
Can you imagine?
So what did this demonstrate about Sun Tzu?
It showed his commitment to discipline and strategy, even at a brutal cost.
Okay.
At first, the women giggled, couldn't follow his commands. Sun Tzu, to make a point about the absolute authority of a general, ordered the execution
Wow.
of the two women leading the companies.
That's a powerful statement.
It was harsh. Even King Hilu was shocked.
Yeah, I bet.
But the remaining women followed his commands perfectly after that, marching and maneuvering with total precision.
Yeah, they got the message.
They definitely did. And this display, according to the Shiji and the Wuyu Chunki, convinced the king that he had found his military genius.
He found his guy. It's a dark side for sure, but undeniably effective.
I mean, look at the results.
Did Sun Tzu actually lead armies in battle?
He did. He's credited with several successful campaigns for King Hilu, including a big win against the Chu state, a major rival of Wu.
Wow, so he really knew his stuff. This wasn't just theory for him.
No, he was a proven commander in the field.
Okay, yeah.
And that experience just adds another layer to his writing.
So it's starting to make sense why the art of war has been so influential. It's not just some guy's thoughts, it's based on real experience.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to delve into next. We'll move past the man himself and look at the book itself.
Okay.
What are the core principles that make it relevant even today in a world so different from ancient China?
This is where it gets really exciting. We're going to dive into those timeless nuggets of wisdom and see how we can apply them to our lives today.
I'm ready.
Me too.
So,
Let's do it.
okay, so let's shift gears a bit from the man to his masterpiece,
Right.
The Art of War. What makes this book so enduring? You know, is it just about military tactics, or is there more to it?
That's the big question. I used to think it was just about battlefield strategy. But the more I learn about Sun Tzu, the more I see these principles applying to all kinds of situations.
Absolutely. It's about understanding conflict itself, whether you're on a battlefield or in a boardroom, or even just in your personal life.
Yeah.
You know, Sun Tzu believed that the best way to win was to avoid fighting altogether.
Wait, really? How do you win without fighting?
Mm.
That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
That's what's so brilliant about Sun Tzu. He understood that true victory comes from outsmarting your opponent, dismantling their strategy before things even start,
Oh, okay.
choosing your battles carefully, knowing when to strike and when to hold back.
So it's more like a mental game than just brute force.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Strategic positioning, psychological warfare, all of that.
Interesting.
One of the key principles the documentary highlights is the importance of deception.
Ooh, deception.
Yeah, creating an illusion of weakness, to lure your opponent into a trap, attacking where they least expect it.
It's like that classic kung fu movie move.
Yes.
Where the master acts all weak and then bam!
Exactly.
They strike back when the opponent's off guard.
Sun Tzu would love that analogy. He was all about using your opponent's strength against them, turning their momentum to your advantage.
Okay.
Understanding their motivations, their fears, their weaknesses, that's how you gain a decisive advantage.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like knowing your enemy's playbook better than they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminds me of that quote.
Uh-huh.
If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
Classic Sun Tzu right there.
Mhm.
It captures his philosophy perfectly. He believed self-knowledge was just as important as knowing your opponent,
Mm-hmm.
understanding your own strengths and weaknesses so you can leverage your advantages and minimize your vulnerabilities.
It's like playing to your strengths and finding your opponent's blind spots.
Hmm.
This is starting to sound less like ancient military strategy and more like a guide to success in anything.
Exactly. And remember, Sun Tzu was big on adaptability.
Okay.
He believed that a rigid strategy would lead to disaster.
Right.
Because the battlefield, just like the business world or even our personal lives, is constantly changing.
For sure.
You need to adapt.
Makes sense. It's not about following a script.
No.
It's about being flexible, reading the situation,
Yes.
and adjusting your approach on the fly.
And that leads us to another fascinating aspect of Sun Tzu's thinking.
Okay, what's that?
The terrain.
Terrain.
He believed that understanding the battlefield both literally and figuratively is essential for success.
So like in a business negotiation,
Exactly.
the terrain would be things like market conditions, the competition, or even just the personalities you're dealing with.
You got it. It's about being aware of the context, the environment,
Mhm.
the factors that can influence the outcome.
It's like seeing the bigger picture, not just what's right in front of you.
Precisely.
This is making me realize how much strategic thinking is involved in everyday life, even if we don't always realize it.
Right.
Like we're always making decisions, assessing risks, trying to reach our goals,
All the time.
whether it's getting a promotion or negotiating a price on something or even just dealing with family.
That's a great observation. And it highlights why Sun Tzu's teachings are still relevant. His principles aren't just for generals and CEOs.
Yeah.
They're for anyone who wants to navigate life with more awareness, skill, and strategic insight.
I love that. This is really hitting home for me. I feel like I'm seeing the world through a different lens now. Like I'm suddenly aware of all these strategic elements I never noticed before.
That's the power of Sun Tzu. He challenges us to think differently, to look beyond what's obvious,
Yeah.
to approach problems with a strategic mindset.
But this whole conversation has also got me thinking about the potential downsides of his teachings.
Oh, how so?
Well, his principles are about winning right, gaining an advantage over others.
Mm.
Could that lead to a kind of ruthless, win-at-all-costs mentality?
That's a really important question, and it's been debated for centuries. Some argue that Sun Tzu's teachings can be used for manipulative purposes, or
Yeah.
even unethical ones, especially if they're taken out of context or applied without any moral compass.
Right. It's like any powerful tool.
Exactly.
It can be used for good or for bad.
It all depends on the person using it.
It's that old saying, knowledge is power, but it's what you do with that power that matters.
Absolutely. And that's why it's crucial to approach Sun Tzu's teachings with a critical eye. Understand the nuances, the ethical implications, and apply them with wisdom and restraint.
So it's not just about mastering the techniques.
Right.
It's about developing the character and judgment to use them wisely.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Sun Bin.
Oh yeah, the other strategist.
Remember him, he was a contemporary of Sun Tzu and also wrote a book called The Art of War.
Right. So now we have two arts of war. This is where things get really interesting.
Definitely. What makes Sun Bin's approach unique?
Yeah, what does he bring to the table?
Well, for one thing, Sun Bin's Art of War is longer and more practical than Sun Tzu's. It reflects how warfare was changing at the time, especially the rise of siege warfare.
That makes sense. Siege warfare would require a different set of skills and tactics than open battles.
Absolutely. What are some of the things Sun Bin focuses on?
Yeah. What are his key insights?
Well, he goes into great detail about the logistics of siege warfare. Building siege towers, battering rams, undermining walls, cutting off supplies. He even gets into the psychological aspects of it.
Really?
Yeah, how to demoralize the enemy, break their will to resist.
It sounds like he was a master of the mental game as well as the physical one.
He definitely was. And it's so interesting to compare his approach to Sun Tzu's.
So how so?
Sun Tzu advised against besieging cities.
Really? Why?
He saw it as costly and time-consuming.
Okay.
But Sun Bin recognized that in some situations, a well-executed siege could be a decisive strategy.
So they're both masters of strategy,
Mm-hmm.
but with different perspectives based on their own experiences
You think
and the
science-
context of their times.
It makes you think about how military thinking evolved,
Right.
how technology changed things, and how these strategic principles stay relevant across different eras.
It really does make you wonder how Sun Tzu and Sun Bin would approach modern warfare with drones and cyber attacks and all that.
Right. Would they see these advances as changing the nature of war? Or would they recognize those underlying principles of strategy that have always been there?
I think they'd be amazed by the technology, but they'd also see that human nature hasn't really changed that much.
True.
We're still driven by the same desires, fears, motivations,
Absolutely.
and those things shape the course of any conflict.
That's a great point. It highlights why we study these ancient texts, not just for their historical value, but for the timeless wisdom about human behavior and conflict.
So what can we learn from both Sun Tzu and Sun Bin? What are the key takeaways?
Well, one takeaway is the importance of adaptability.
Okay.
Both emphasized adjusting your strategy based on the situation, the terrain, and the strength and weaknesses of your opponent. And in today's world, that's more important than ever.
Right. It's not about sticking to a plan.
No.
It's about pivoting, improvising, being able to think on your feet.
Exactly. Another key takeaway is the power of understanding your opponent. Both Sun Tzu and Sun Bin believe that knowing your enemy's motivations, fears, and vulnerabilities is key to gaining an advantage.
So it's not just about knowing what they're doing,
No.
but why they're doing it.
Exactly. It's about seeing the world through their eyes, understanding their perspective.
And using that to anticipate their moves.
Precisely. And finally, both emphasize the importance of discipline and strategic thinking.
Okay.
They believed victory isn't about luck or brute force.
Right.
It's about careful planning, strategic execution, and being able to adapt.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
We've gone from ancient China to the boardrooms of today, all thanks to these two brilliant strategists.
I know. It's amazing how these ancient texts can still speak to us today.
Totally.
They challenge our assumptions
Yeah.
and offer timeless insights into conflict strategy and success.
But you know, this deep dive has also left me with some questions.
Like what?
If Sun Tzu and Sun Bin could see the world today with all its complexity and technology, what would they think? Would they still believe that their principles of warfare are relevant?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore in more depth as we wrap up our deep dive into Sun Tzu and the art of war.
I mean, it's mind-boggling to imagine how they would react to our modern world.
It really is.
Would they see things like nuclear weapons and cyber warfare as just new tools, you know? in this age-old game of strategy?
It's a question that's fascinated people for decades, you
Yeah.
know. Some argue that Sun Tzu's principles are outdated in the face of all this technology,
Okay.
but others believe that the core concepts like strategy, deception, adaptability, those are timeless and universal.
It makes you wonder if Sun Tzu, with his focus on avoiding direct confrontation, would even be horrified by how destructive modern weapons are.
It's possible he believed in winning with as little bloodshed as possible, you
Yeah.
know,
Well,
outmaneuvering your opponent instead of having a costly and destructive battle.
yeah,
He might see the whole idea of nuclear war as like the ultimate failure of strategy.
that's a scary thought. But I guess he'd also have to recognize that the whole idea of power has shifted, right?
Of course.
In today's world, influence isn't just about military strength. It's about economics, technology,
Yeah.
even controlling information.
Absolutely. Sun Tzu would probably be fascinated by how technology has created new battlefields, you know,
Yeah.
and new forms of leverage. Imagine him analyzing the strategies of big tech companies or the impact of social media.
The power of information.
Exactly. Or the complexities of cyber warfare.
It's crazy to think about. He might even see the internet as this giant terrain, with
Yeah.
its own strategic points and opportunities for deception.
That's a great point. His principles could definitely apply to understanding how information flows,
Right.
how narratives are shaped, how influence is wielded in the digital age.
It's like we're seeing the art of war through this
Right.
whole new lens, one that reflects our modern world.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that question,
Yeah.
are Sun Tzu's teachings still relevant today?
Right, are they?
I think the answer is yes,
Okay.
but with a caveat.
Ooh, a caveat. Okay, I'm listening. What is it?
We can't just take these ancient principles and apply them to modern problems without thinking. We need to consider the ethics,
Mhm.
of his strategies and make sure they're being used responsibly.
That's a super important point.
Yeah.
His emphasis on things like deception and manipulation, if you take those too far,
Right.
could be used to justify some pretty bad behavior.
Absolutely. We need to approach his teachings with a critical mind. Think about the consequences of our actions and always aim to use our strategic skills for good.
So it's about more than just knowing how to win.
Yes.
It's about being a good person while you're doing it.
It's about being an ethical leader, someone who understands the power of these ideas, but also the responsibility.
I think that's a really valuable lesson that we can take away from this whole deep dive into Sun Tzu.
I agree.
It's not just about winning at all costs.
No.
It's about winning with integrity, wisdom, and doing what's right.
I think that's the ultimate test of a true strategist.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
We've explored so much the ancient world of Sun Tzu, the timeless wisdom of the art of war, and we've really grappled with its relevance in our world today.
We've uncovered some fascinating insights, challenged our own assumptions, and maybe even tapped into our own inner strategist along the way.
Now it's your turn, listeners, to continue the exploration. As you face your own challenges in life, remember what we've talked about. Think strategically, adapt to new situations, and use your knowledge for good.
And who knows, maybe you'll even find yourself using these ancient principles in ways that Sun Tzu himself could never have dreamed of.
Until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep strategizing.